In this lecture, we're going to pick up where the last one left off, and we're going to continue and see how you can localize date, string, and number information. We want to go to the root level of the window and go down in here, and we want to do something when this component is loaded. So we're going to say component on completed. And if you remember in the slides, we said that date and time information can be localized if you try to display that as a string. These are the methods we're going to look at and how you can use them. We are going to define a date object, and we want to play with the toLocalDateString method. This method contains date information, so if you try to read time information in here, you're most probably going to get some garbage information. You shouldn't do that. This only contains date information. One way you might use it is say print mdate toLocalDateString. And if you try to print this, you're going to get date information. Let's do that. You see that we get the current date. You can also use these methods by specifically putting in the locale that you want to see your date information in. So let's do that. We can say print mdate toLocalDateString. And if we wanted to see our information in German, for example, we could pass in a German locale. Let's run this to see what we get. You see, we have the information in German. If you speak the language, you can understand this. We can also, for example, specify the locale in French, put in FR here, and put in FR in capital letters. Let's run this. Lundi 15 octobre 2018. This is in French. On top of the locale, you can also specify the format you want to see your information in. Let's say I want to see my information in Chinese, and this is how I specify the format I want my information to be displayed in. Let's run this to see what we get. And you see that in Chinese, I get the year, the month, and the day, and they are separated by these characters that are put in here. You can play with this and put in whatever locale you want to play with. And if you want to know the format that you can pass in here, we can go back to the slides and see different ways we can show our information. So 1D is the day as a number, 2Ds are day as a number with a leading 0, and you can read this to see what you can get. 3Ms represent the name of the month, something like Jan to December. 4Ms are going to show you the name of the month, something like this, and this is what we have in our example. You can play with this to see what you get and combine this with different locales to play with this and get a feel of how it works. Again, I should remind you that this function only gives you date information. If you try to extract time information with it, you're going to get some garbage, and you really shouldn't do that. It is not supposed to be used to give you time information. The next method we want to look at is the toLocalString, which contains both date and time information. I am also going to give you a usage example of it. This is a good example of how you can use it. You can also pass in the locale and specify the format you want to see your information in: the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minute, and the seconds. Let's run the application and see what we get. And here is our date time information. We also have a locale time string method, which only contains time. We're also going to see an example usage of it. It only contains time information also. If you try to read date information from this, you're going to get something unpredictable. So you shouldn't do that. Let's run the application, and we should see the time in this format: hour, minute, second, separated by columns. This is what we have here. Okay, we also have another set of methods that are used to construct dates from the formats that we have here. For example, we have a date like this. If we want to turn this into a date object, we can use from localDateString to turn all this into a date object. So how could we do that? We can say var and say my date for the variable name and say something like this. Let's collapse this so that we see the entire thing. Okay, you see that we are calling the from locale date string. We are passing in the locale we want to interpret the data with. We pass in the date and we pass in the format. If we try to print this date, let's actually put in some text. Date is, let's put in my date. Let's run the application and see what we get. My date is, you see that we see the date. Okay, the time is garbage because we are only interested in date information because we are using from locale date string. Let's see if we try to read this in Chinese. How could we do that? We could copy this actually and put it in here and run the application. Let's see what we get. Okay, we get the data in Chinese. What did we get before? We also get the data in Chinese. Okay, the data is being displayed in Chinese here because this is my default locale. But if you want, you could use all these methods to specify how you want your date displayed. We can also try and say my date equals this to pass in the same method, but we want to pass in the month names, but we are trying to read this in English while the month name is in Chinese. Let's try and see what we get. We're going to print the same thing again, run the application. You see that it says date is invalid date because we are trying to read something in Chinese and we want to read it as English. The fix for this is to read it in the correct language. So we're going to put in Chinese. And if we run now, we should see a correct date. Okay, this is what we have here. We also have a from locale string method, Control-A, Control-I to align, that contains date and time information. And this is how you read the information. You pass in the format that your data is in, and you pass in the string pattern that you are using to read that. And we read this in English. If we run the application, we should have date and time information based on this. And this is what we have here. We have a from locale time string method, Control-A, Control-I to align. And it basically is the same thing. The only thing is that this only contains time information, and this is exactly what we are reading in here. Let's run the application. It's only going to have time, and the date is going to be garbage. What you should care about in here is only the time, because that's what this method gives you. 16, 23, 35, 16, 23, 35. This is what we have here. On top of this, we can also do localization operations on numbers. We're going to play with this also in Qt Creator. We put in a debug statement to say what we're going to do, read the number in a given locale and print it out again. This is what we are doing here. We are setting the locale to German. We are defining a variable here, and we are trying to read the number in a given locale and print it out again. Let's run the application. This is really not so interesting, but when you need something like this, this is going to come in handy. I just want you to know what you have available when you are working with localization. You can also do something like this, Control-A, Control-I to align. Notice the difference. We have a dot in here, and we don't have it in here. And this is going to be recognized in German. Let's run the application. And we're going to have the same output basically, but notice the format we read the data in is different. This is what we have, and this is what we have here. To show you what can go wrong if you get these formats wrong, let's put a dot in here and try to read this. Let's run the application. And it's going to show invalid format because this is not recognized in the language we specified in here. So you need to be careful with this. You need to be aware of the rules of the locale you are working in if you try to read data in that locale. So I am actually going to leave this in here so that you know. When you come back to the code, you can see that. I'm going to put in a dot and say wrong format for locale. This should be enough to remind you. We can also do some currency output, Control-A, Control-I to align. For example, we can specify the locale to be Chinese and say the number is this one and output this as a currency. This is how you use the method to locale currency string. You specify the locale and the symbol that you want to use. Let's run the application. We should see 123 yuan. 83, invalid format. This is not what we want. Let's comment this out. Run again. Did we print that? I don't think we did. Yes, currency is yuan 123. If you change this to US, it's going to be in US dollars. It's going to be the English US. Let's run again. And this should be it. I have seen that for this to work, the locale has to be installed on your machine. For example, if I try to do this in French, I am going to get something unpredictable. Let's run this. It's showing me euros, but there's a question mark here, meaning that the French is broken somehow because I don't have the French locale installed on my computer here. So you should try the locale that is installed on your computer, on your system. If you need some precision on the output of the numbers that you put out, you can also do that using the second parameter as f here and specifying the precision you want. For example, I can print this to be 4 digits after the decimal point. Let's print this. Let's see what we get. We should get 4 digits. And if we want, we could put in whatever we want in here for the number of digits. And I think this is really enough to give you an introduction to work with localization on your strings, dates, and numbers. In the next lecture, we're going to see how to work with sequence collection types. I'll see you there.